All right, hello family. So today this is going to be a series of information. So this particular video is going to be a little extensive and long, so strap in, pause when you need to, and get in your cars and listen in the car if you have to. But this is necessary so that you can understand how this occurs from the very beginning, from the research that's being conducted on you and your children, like lab rats, and who's doing it. So strap in, get comfortable, get your coffee, and I'm going to go over for you today who's doing what and why. And pull out your birth certificates. Now, the one I'm going to show you today is from the 70s, so I'm not sure if you don't have that original and you got like a copy. I don't know that it has all this information on it because I couldn't find my newer versions. So when I do, I'll check them out and see if it has all this information or not. But I'm going to kind of break down what all these little digits and numbers and stuff mean for you so that you have a more clear picture of what's happening behind the scenes. I'm not sure how many videos are going to be in this series because, like I said, they're going to be kind of long to explain to you the full course of what's going on. Again, like I said, this is a birth certificate from the 70s. And as you can see on the top, there's a registration district number. And then there's a registered number. That registered district number, 22.0, that number represents the district of empirical data study that you're in. So this is the main frame or the main data centers that are keeping the information stored about your child from their inception. So these people will place your child's information into a data bank at the hospital level, and then they register you, obviously your child, with the vital statistics and the public health departments, as well as child support. And this is all done on purpose and for purpose. So that 220 number, keep that in mind. We'll get into who that is in a little while, but that, just so you know for now, is the 1970s version. I don't know for sure that it's on. I hope you guys can see it close because I know it's kind of messy there. All right, so, well, then I had other pictures to show you. My skills in this is not so good. There we go. Okay, so now we also have the state of Illinois, 547, the child's birth number. I don't know what this child's birth number leads to yet. I haven't had a chance to look into it, but I think it might have more to do with the hospital. But what I'm really more interested in is this number beginning with 112. That is the number you want to pay attention to. That is what's called a child identifier. So everyone keeps looking for the Social Security numbers, but actually these are the numbers that hold the most water. From what I understand, it looks so far that there are 4 of them. So this one, though, is the child from birth through 18 that their vital statistics will be kept listing the events of their life. So this is, if you were to think about it as a job, okay, and you were born and you automatically have a job, you have an occupation, that occupation is life. The departments segment that life, that occupation, into all the separate departments in order to surveil and keep track of certain things that are occurring in your life depending on the segment of your life. So this number is relative to child support, divorce court, CPS, those kinds of things. Because what happens with this number is all the data that they collect throughout the child's life is stored. And whenever an event occurs in the child's life, they keep that information in that storage. So while your child goes to the doctor, if you say you're on a WIC, WIC provides, food and milk and cheese. So when you take the food, milk, and cheese from the WIC department, which is under the Department of Agriculture, this gives them the right to surveil the child's growth and physical health. So you think you're getting some kind of service for nothing, but there is a term to that agreement. So if you take WIC, it is for 3 years that you have permitted them to spy on your baby and you. You have basically transferred your rights to the State Department to monitor the baby's health based on his nutritional intake. And there's stipulations to it. When you take it, you have to go to the doctor every, so often to monitor the baby's growth and all of that. And if you don't, then you're in breach of contract. And when you're in breach of contract, there are consequences. So people take these things and don't think much about them at all. But keep in mind, every time you take a service from the government, there is always a term, there is always stipulation, and there is always a consequence if you don't meet your end of the bargain. But also what occurs is if you allow them to surveil the baby's health, and for some reason the doctor thinks that the baby's not growing properly, or for whatever reasons, whether it could be something as innocent as just, something is wrong with the baby. So now you've also agreed to allow for them to enter the baby in human subject research so that they can keep monitoring the baby's health issue and gain empirical data study on that issue. And it will all be maintained under this particular number. And then what happens next is they report it to vital statistics, where they can explain that some sort of event that may be traumatic to the baby's growth has occurred. And then they'll keep monitoring this baby throughout the course of whatever that illness is. And again, whatever they want to do with that baby, as far as how far they want to research him or use medical intervention, you don't have a choice. Since you signed up for this, since you participated and put your agreement on that paper through a signature, if they decide that the baby needs to get certain medical treatment that you don't like, disagree with, or feel is too invasive, you're not going to have a choice now. You're going to have to roll with that because you've signed a contract agreeing to it when you took the WIC, food stamps, Medicaid, any of those things. So keep that in mind. But this child identifier, this particular one is under the public Department of Health. So what I have here is the public health card. Now, I've never seen one of these, except for, like I said, a friend of mine had this from the 70s, and it was kind of cool. So if you can see, there's a raised seal on this. Looks like a Social Security card, but it's not. It's a public health card. So this is basically you registering your baby for this monitoring in the public health department. And that raised seal, I don't know if you guys can see it on camera or not, but inside the middle there, it says 220. So that's, again, the district that your child has been registered for surveillance. So for them to be able to watch all of your child's events, this would be the district by which they are registered in. And that is simply meaning that through data collection, they're going to be reviewing and researching all the data about your child that's collected in that database. This is just to show you, again, there's the child. It says a birth number, but that's actually an identifier number. You'll find that number on a lot of your paperwork if you have it still. So if you have gotten any public aid or anything like that, you can find that number typically on your public aid documents. If you have received child support, you'll find that number on your child support documents. And in the courtroom, in my state, some of them do like a barcode so you can't see the numbers, but in my state, they still show the number. And that's what that barcode is for. It's this child identifier number so that they can register the event into the system that will be shared among several different agencies depending on what is happening with the baby. So this is just kind of a quick overview of how you guys can determine what exactly is going on behind the scenes so that you understand how to grasp what the message is that I'm delivering here. So those child identifier numbers are really purposed to do human subject research. So human subject research, meaning that it's not what you think. It's not when you go to a doctor and the doctor says, okay, well, we have this new medication or, you know, something like that. It is really all the time in your life. It occurs because everything that happens in your life throughout the baby's life, they are recording it so that they can get a profile, a social and psychological profile of the child for many reasons. There's economic reasons, there's public health reasons, safety reasons. So what they're trying to do is to develop the psychological profile of a child to determine in the future what the child is going to be like personality wise and how much money that child is worth based in services. So it's an underwriting. If they predetermine what they believe he's going to do for a living as far as work. Will he go to college and be professional? Will he be a laborer? They decide on whether or not, if like your kid's in school and maybe he's a little wiggle worm and he doesn't really sit quietly for 8 hours a day as they expect him to, he might get labeled as having a social defect, you know. So this is why this information is very important to understand. So if your child is the little wiggle worm in school, they will offer you services that are lucrative to the networks that are together conducting business for Medicaid insurance purposes. So if your kid's a little wiggle worm and they want to say he has something like ADD or ADHD, you know, the typical move is the social worker will step in, give him basically not a diagnosis, but a suspected diagnosis. But if you ask me, it's the same thing. So whatever. So social worker will suggest that you get a psychologist in order to get the psychologist to administer the ADD medications to calm the child down. Now, if you refuse to do this, this is also recorded as you being defiant. So you also have identifier numbers. And if you don't want to accept that service for your child, it will be considered that you are being defiant and not helping the child. And therefore, your risk factor behind the scenes for being a child abuser will increase. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to take the baby or the child, but what it does mean is that you are of higher risk for them to determine that someday in the near future, they're going to have to deal with you again because you're not playing ball. So human subject research is basically where that unit number comes into play. So each department has a child identifier and they segment your personality into those departments. So if you are under the Department of Health and Human Services, this will be the child, the parent. This particular number is for that purpose. So that also will be public health and safety. So what it means is that under the Health and Human Service Department, we can expect that they are looking at health and safety issues for your medical conditions, being economic, or I'm sorry, not economic, public safety, like, how do you call it, the immunizations. So if you determine that you don't want to have your child immunized, this means that through this system, it will show that your child is an elevated risk to harm the public because he hasn't received those immunizations. And the immunizations are purposed to protect all the people in the public from receiving illnesses that will spread. So if you refuse those services, this has been logged into the system. And when you deal with anybody in the government, a school system, doctors, a teacher, you know, anybody like that, they now know that, number one, you didn't allow for them to do these ADD drug dosing your kid thing, and they now understand that you also have refused to do immunizations, and therefore that will now increase your risk to be a harm to the public. What they see it as is that you are showing no regard for your neighbors, for your community, and this makes you look basically very close to being a terrorist at this point. And I know that sounds crazy, but it does lead up to that. So this is why it's important to understand why this system is in place and what it's really used for, because they try to make it sound like, oh, it's for everybody's good. No, it's not. So this child now who's been and hasn't been immunized, and he hasn't received any psychological care or drug doses to calm him down, to make the teacher's life easier, this is defiance. Your kid's hyper, and now he's going to get this stigma or this prejudice against him in this system that never gets erased. This is there with him for life. So if you have strong beliefs that your child shouldn't be doing these things, it does stigmatize your child. Okay, so before we delve into the human subject research stuff, what you need to understand is that what this unit is really, that's on that birth certificate, is a unit of education. So in the past, there were two classes of persons. There were the higher class and the lower class, no in between. The higher class was determined to have a higher level of knowledge about life and have, better discipline and better education. And therefore, it was determined that because they had a higher level of knowledge, they should be the ones who would determine how government would work. They get to be the boss, basically, simply based on the fact that they have a higher level of education. For those of us who didn't have that type of knowledge and that type of education, the secondary class of persons, we would be educated differently through institutions, and our education would come down from those with the higher level of knowledge or degreed people. They were categorized into two different classes, white and colored. So the whites were not a color of skin. White only meant that you were of a higher educational value, and that also meant that you were free. So when they spoke of free white men, it didn't mean that the free white men were actually pale in color. There could be colorful white men. I was looking to see, I know I have a case in here to show, but I couldn't find it right now, where it explains that, I think it was an Arabic who went to court, and he wanted his people to be classified as being free white men. And the court agreed because they had come from a higher level of knowledgeable people. So they didn't believe they should be categorized as being colored, the lower class. So the court actually agreed with him on that, and Arabics then were construed to be free white men. So this goes to show you that a lot of what they're pumping out, what they're teaching you, is really far from the truth. Coloreds or lower educated people were not specifically pale in color and skin tone. Okay, so this creates a lot of confusion because people have the preconceived notion that a lot of melanated skin or darker skinned people were all just some kind of lower educated slaves, and that's not true. I traced back, actually, one of my former friends is an attorney, and he and his family go way back into the early 1800s, like great great grandpa stuff, So that man was Black, but he was also a judge in the early 1800s, and it passed down from generation to generation, that knowledge, that education. So although, as we know him today as being a Black male, he's actually a white person because he has a higher level of education and knowledge, and therefore is determined to be free. So when the colored people, they were not all Black, there were a lot of white coloreds, okay? So these people simply needed to be educated by the more knowledgeable people, and therefore the higher knowledgeable people opened up what we call today as being institutions. So our government institutions are designed to educate the lower class or the less knowledgeable. And they just want to cover that up. They don't want you to know that you are technically a lower class of individual and that they believe themselves to be better than you, and that you should learn from them and follow their model of social behavior because you don't know any better, you're an idiot. So that's basically all that means. But it's important to understand that to get a big picture of why this works the way it does. So certification under Health and Human Service Department, they are collecting data about you to determine your level of knowledge and education. Are you learning? Are you complying? So in order for them to be able to do that, they have to see into your life, but they can't come live with you. They can't come into your house. So these are what were called in the past to be health inspections. So you're constantly in the state of being in a health inspection based off of all the information that they're surveilling from you. So certification means the official notification by the institution to the supporting federal department or agent component in accordance with the requirements of this policy that a research project or activity involving human subjects has been reviewed and approved by an IRB in accordance with an approved assurance. And that is what I believe the birth certificate is for, based on what I've learned as far as the units of education and the coloreds versus whites as a class of knowledgeable people, whites being free men because they're so highly knowledgeable, they can do whatever they want because they have an understanding of the universe, I guess, and coloreds needing to be kept confined in the sense that because they have bad social behaviors and habits, they propose a harm to the public. So we're going to try to bring them up to the same class of understanding as we're in. So when we talk about a birth certificate, we know that there is a unit of education stamped on that birth certificate, and that it leads us to one of our government institutions called the public health. And well, back in the 70s, it was called public health, but today it's Health and Human Services. That is an institution. And certification means that that's a notification by said institution to the supporting federal department or agency, Health and Human Services component, in accordance with the requirements of this policy that a research project or activity involving human subjects has been reviewed and approved by an IRB in accordance with an approved assurance. Let's talk about that. So that certificate that is provided shows that you are a participant, willing, consensual participant, and have permitted them to conduct human subject research. And if you look at your birth certificate, you'll find that the mother is an informant. Informant is a scientific term. Informant means that somebody has direct knowledge that they can share about that baby in order to begin or underwrite the baby's future or predicted personalities. And that's what the human subject research is for. When it says here that it's approved by an IRB, that is what is called an institutional review board. So every time they would like to conduct a specific type of research, project, or activity involving the human, the baby, they must first get their project approved before actually launching it, and then it becomes what's called a demonstration project. So they have to say that, okay, we want to investigate all the kids in these communities to see how many of them have an attention deficit disorder. Before they do that, they go to this IRB, and the IRB looks to see how they intend on conducting this research, how long it will be, how much money it will take, and they approve or disapprove that particular type of research being done. So these research projects go through your, what's it called, the school's, not supervisor. I can't think of what the guy is, the higher up school, you know who I'm talking about, the superintendent, there you go. So the school district's superintendent will receive information from Health and Human Services that they intend on launching this research project. And they inform the school that the school will get a chunk of money from the funding that is approved by the IRB. So, of course, the school is incentivized to participate in allowing the children in school to be researched in this arena because they make money. It makes sense. So here's the thing though, if the school doesn't find that any of the kids have ADHD, depending on the terms of the contract, in a few months' time or in a year, then they may lose the opportunity to collect the funding from this project. So it would behoove them to make sure that they find children to label as being ADHD, or there's no money going to come in for them to do that. So this is why I don't like these programs, because although there may be children who have some sort of difficulties in that behavioral side of things, it's really not their business. That's how I see it. I don't know if you see it that way, but the thing is, if they are believing that 2 children in the whole school have ADHD, this is no good for them. They need at least, say, 20. So they're going to have to seek out children and label them, and it could be an incorrect diagnosis. And they really don't have the credentials to determine that, number one. But number two, if we really look at psychology, it's not a conclusive science. It's theory. It's hypothesis. It's not like you will find one psychologist who says, okay, ADHD is bad. It's a social defect. It can be dosed and drugged and fixed and healed or whatever. And then you could find 20 more who disagree. So how do we allow for people to psychologically probe our children's minds and rely on the fact that they're doing it with care and compassion when money is involved? And it's an impossibility. And it works in a very much larger scale as far as the money is concerned than just that. This is just to give you a general overview. But the money is way larger because it's an economic trickle-down effect for the fact that we want to educate in our community through the colleges all of these different professionals. But why would anyone go get that education if there's no jobs? So if each school only has 2 possible kids that might have ADHD, we're going to decrease the opportunity for social workers to be employed. And therefore, we're going to decrease the business opportunity of the local community schools, because no one's going to go and take that class. They're not going to pay the college for that kind of education if they're not going to be employed. So this is why it's important to kind of understand all of those different facets in a general view, and over future videos I'll get deeper entailed into that. So clinical trial means a research study in which 1 or more human subjects are prospectively assigned to 1 or more interventions, which may include placebo or other control, to evaluate the effects of the interventions on biomedical or behavioral health related outcomes. These are important words for you to understand in the future. Everything comes down to outcomes. So when they are putting you in family court, or even if you're in criminal court, it is always going to be a study to determine how they can better the outcome of the subject. So all of these data collective research programs over the years, so we'll take ADD for example. So they believe, some psychologist in the college somewhere decides that kids who are defiant aren't defiant because they're bad, they're defiant because they have a medical problem. And we need to stop the teachers from punishing those defiant little children and start to collect data about them to see if it's possible that we can prevent or intervene into the little baby's life and somehow fix his social defect. So now that we've determined that this is a possibility, what we do next is we launch a demonstration project, because we don't really know the answer yet. But we won't be able to find the answer unless we conduct human subject research over communities that have reported a lot of disciplinary problems. So if a few schools in your community have reported in the system that, John and Mary and Mike are all problem children, and they're all over the place, they can't sit still. Now we know that this is a great target school to launch this demonstration project. So we'll go ahead and we will engage the school's leaders, and they will then let the social workers and the teachers know that, please give us the kids who are misbehaving, and we'll create a special education course and a special education class. We'll put them all in there so we can observe their behavior and see if they really are defiant because they're just bad kids, or could there possibly be some sort of issue. So while they gather that research and they come to a determination that, yes, these children in fact are good kids, it's just that they have a social defect, we can now put a label on it. So kids who are wiggle worms are not bad kids, they have ADHD. And how can we now fix that problem? So they will continue the research or extend the research if they can determine that. And while that research is extended, they'll start experimenting on those particular classes of kids. So they will initiate a team of people to develop some sort of alternative education styles and methods. And if that doesn't work, they'll switch it around and try something else. Then they will engage the medical professional arena, and that's how they develop the drugs. And then the drugs will be a recommendation, and it will appear to be a choice. But in reality, it's less of a choice than you think. So now that they've completed this demonstration project and have come up with the conclusion that they do have a social defect, this particular defect will get listed in their medical clinicianal books. So now they can identify in the future and target any children who have the wiggles as being a possible participant or possible sale. So if your child is getting the wiggle worms today based on this past research, the teacher has been trained to identify that child as being a possible patient for, or possible recipient for, very lucrative medication. And this is a great sales pipeline. I can't express to you like this. If you were selling something, you could not ask for a better insider view to get the best leads in the world. This is great for the drug companies. So now they have this for-profit company who receives private information about your child all the time. So first it starts with your social worker up to the psychologist and down to the drug provider, the drug dealer. That's just the way it works. And this is just one example of many, many programs, clinical trials that are occurring every day in your child's school, at work, and everywhere you pretty much go. So that's what it means to be in a clinical trial. It means that somebody is conducting a research study over a human subject. So this is something, let that sit for a minute. This is insane to me. I just don't know who came up with this idea and decided it was a good one. So department, agency, or head, those are your health and human services people in this kind of circumstance. If you're dealing in something where your credit score is a problem, or a foreclosure is a problem, then you have a different identifier number under the Department of Commerce that has basically surveilled all of your financial activities through your banks, through your credit, consumer purchases, things like that. So that's how they break down the departments. It's each department is meant to surveil a certain lifestyle. So in health and human services, like I said, we're going to look at families, children, but if you're having a financial issue, it's going to be under the Department of Finance and Commerce. And this is where they keep all the data about that specific activity in order to manage it properly. And that's what it really means to be secure in your persons and papers and things, because they take that data, they store it, and they keep it secure. And they promise that. They promise that it won't go anywhere that they didn't decide for it to go. So they protect it from data breaches. And what you don't know is that behind the scenes, all this data is being traded with thousands of agencies, because it doesn't take much for them to approve agencies or corporations access to that data, because it's lucrative. It's good money for them to trade that data. So you think that this is all staying between you, your kid's teacher, the social worker, and the psychologist, but that is the furthest thing from the truth. So this kind of information gets shared amongst several different departments and agencies upon request, but all of them, in order to collect information from the data bank about your child, they all need what's called a certificate of participation. And we'll get into that at another time. But that's, you know, basically what we were talking about. When someone wants to get involved in human subject research, they have to have a certificate. And that is a big deal in the future when we get a little deeper into how this works. So federal department or agency, the department or agency itself, rather than its bureaus, offices, or divisions, that takes appropriate administrative action to make this policy applicable to the research involving human subjects. It conducts, supports, or otherwise regulates the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Defense, or Central Intelligence Agency. So that basically is all in a nutshell who we're dealing with, that they just review the regulation and determine how it's all going to be done. Now, I want you to understand something. This is fairly new. This was a free-for-all not too long ago. They're just now adding protections for all of this. This has been going on for quite a long time, as far as I can tell, at least back into the 80s. So somewhere in the mid-80s, it looks like all of this data storage and research began, but this human subject research protection is only over the last few years. So imagine what they must have like been going wild with all of that data. They've made so much money off of it since this time. So human subject means a living individual about whom an investigator, whether professional or student, conducting research. So there are many professionals that you're going to come across that conduct human subject research. And this is really important for you to understand, because this is anybody who's taking information from you through intervention, okay, or interaction. And if they're a professional, like a police officer, a CPS worker, a teacher, social worker, judge, attorney, all these different professionals, if they're asking you for any information about yourself, then that means they are conducting research through intervention. Police always conduct an intervention. When you take correctional services, those are interventions, right? If your child is pointed out to have this ADHD, the social worker will now step in. That is an intervention. The teacher observing this behavior and reporting it to the social worker, that's an interaction with the individual. So all of these things are used to analyze and study your babies, or you if you're in a circumstance. So it's very important to understand that these professionals, who they are, what they're trying to accomplish, and why. Anyone who studies, obtains, or uses, analyzes, or generates identifiable private information is conducting human subject research, and the purpose is to correct the behavior or the social behavior of the subject, because the whites or the higher educated believe that you should behave the way they think, the way that they are, or the way that they're not really. I don't even know that it's wrong, because I'll tell you what, they don't act like that, but they want you to act like that. So I don't know. So how this works is they create, like I said, through the departments, a standard model of behavior based off of all this research that they collect through what's called community participatory research, okay? So when they conduct those demonstration projects I told you about earlier, they do community-based ones as well. So they will look at the community as a whole, what their culture is like, meaning what religion are they. So if you have a community that is mostly Christian, then they will model the standard duty of care based on the moral principles of Christians. So they'll try to not offend or go outside the box of what they think a Christian may or may not believe. So this is where we're going to get in deep. So you're going to have to hang in there with me, and I'll explain to you who and why we're having these human subject research projects launched. And it's going to be a little bit, so I'm going to put this on pause for a second, because I'm actually going to go grab some coffee real quick, and I'll be back to explain. Okay, so to give you an overview of community-based participatory research and how it affects you, I'm going to play this video for you. But before we get into this video, I really want to stress how concerned you should be about these research programs, and how concerned you should be as far as how it affects the rest of your life. So if, you know, I noticed that I have helped lots of families and researched a lot of families who were going through problems with the Child Protective Service agencies. And based on that research, I found that a lot of these families have had some sort of intervention with the foster care system or CPS system in the past. So I found that interesting to know that a lot of people who as children were involved with CPS somehow end up being involved with CPS for the rest of their lives. Like seriously, they end up being adults, have children themselves, and CPS will almost always end up being involved again in the cases that I've studied. So I thought that was really interesting, and I've come to realize and understand that it makes you a forever target. It makes you a forever human subject research program, because when you've had that kind of intervention, that department, that agency owns you, your information for life. And so you're more interesting. You're a more interesting subject for research, and your children that you have become more interesting as far as research is concerned. So you have a target on you if you've ever had these kinds of interventions in the past. And it's kind of a scary thought. So they want or desire to conduct more research, because if they don't do that, they can't say what the outcomes of their treatments have been. So they have no choice but to really dig deep into that. So if you were a child who was placed into foster care system and they believed you to be abused, when you grow up and you're an adult, they want to know, were children who were abused also abusers? What's the risk factor that one who's been abused will become an abuser. So they want to know this, and there's no way out of it after that. It's seemingly to be. And this is really important because this is how it affects your children. So as we allow our public school system to conduct these types of studies on our children, and your little one has the wiggles and they want to call it some sort of social defect, this means he's going to be targeted for the rest of his life, and interventions are going to be almost inevitable, because not because he's doing something wrong, but simply because they want to know. So this system, like I said, it keeps a balance of risk factor. So if he's now 25 years old and a police officer pulls him over, they all automatically are going to have a preconceived notion that he has social defective problems and that they should approach him with caution and care. And if the police officer needs to meet his quota and wants to say something additionally negative about him in the system, then this only compiles a false profile of your adult child now, to make him look like he's some kind of socially defective, needs to be fixed person. And then we really need to give him services. So this whole thing, if it's not drawing concern for you, it really, really should. So not even just for what we've already been through, but for the children that are going to be involved in this madness in the future. And there is very, very little privacy protection when it comes to this kind of data. Like I said, it's really only starting to kick in now, and it's so weak. It's paper thin. Your rights to protect this information, to gather the information that they've already collected about you, is extraordinarily difficult. Like, you can't even see what they're saying about you from that perspective in order to dispute it. So if there's a quota to be met in the school and they have falsely identified your child as being socially defective, you don't even know that that information exists. You have to ask yourself why. They're not telling you it's there for a very good reason. And when someone conceals something, let's not pretend that it's for good intention. So I'm just going to show you a real short version, or a short part of this particular video, because I want you to understand in depth that this is not for good intent. And this video, as far as I'm concerned, demonstrates that very well. Oh, so this woman, this is basically a seminar geared towards law enforcement to get them to participate with the researchers to, basically, in my opinion, what they're doing are psychological analysis with no degree. But in order to allow them to do that, they call them social workers. So when you take that criminal justice course, you learn social work and you get a certificate. And now all of a sudden, you can psychologically evaluate someone, determine that they somehow have a problem. That's a diagnostic. I don't care how you slice it, but they try to, if you read the laws and stuff, they try to make it seem like that's not what's going on, but yeah, whatever. So this woman is about to explain to you how they are trying to invade the privacy of Indian tribes. And the Indian tribes don't want them to be in their business. So it should be as simple as, no, you're not going to get into my mind. You're not going to research me, and have a nice day. But that's not what they want. So you listen in, and you can kind of hear how she explains that they don't have a choice, or we want to make it so that they don't have a choice.
In the first scenario, a researcher from an East Coast city comes to your community and wants to do a study on net use. He brings with him surveys and questionnaires to collect data, even though none of these tools have been tested in Native American populations before. This researcher has very few contacts in the community, and he has a hard time recruiting people to participate in the study. Nor did he get permission from the tribal council and the local institutional review board to do this work. He ends up talking to a relatively small number of people. And from this sample, he makes claims that meth use is rampant in your community. publishes these findings, they're picked up by the media, both local and national. Reports start appearing on the TV and in the paper that reflect negatively on your community. This researcher goes back to his home institution on the East Coast. You don't see him again. No programs are developed based on his research findings. You know, he goes on to pursue his research pursuits elsewhere. Now imagine a very different scenario in which people in the community invite researchers to work with them to better understand meth use and how it affects people locally. The researcher collaborates with you, a member of law enforcement, as well as local judges, health providers, and people in recovery. You all work on figuring out the right questions to ask, and you get permission from your tribal council to ask them. Local people are trained to recruit folks for the study and to collect the data. Together, you, your team, and the researcher work to analyze and interpret the data. You then take your project to the next step and work to develop programs based on your findings to better address meth problems in your community. Together, you agree on the best strategies to share and publish your data, and everybody gets proper credit. And in the end, a trusting relationship is built between the researcher and the community, and they go on to address other public health problems in your community. This second example exemplifies what we call community-based participatory research, which is sometimes collapsed into CEPR, which can be a tongue twister when you say it multiple times. What is community-based participatory research? Well, first off, it's a collaborative approach to research that equitably involves all partners in the research process and recognizes the unique strengths that each brings. So what does this mean? It means researchers and community members work together on equal footing to do the research, and that each.
Okay, so let's look at this for a second. Although this is about a tribal research program that they want to do, this also is the same as what they do in each county through your Community Development Commission. So just like she said, you know, most people are not willing to allow some researcher to probe their brains, and they shouldn't have to. But in this case, we're going to go ahead and collaborate with the community leaders and the police officers to see if these tribal people who have meth problems will allow for us to do some sort of, you know, research on their life. Well, they said no, and that should be it. But because this research is so important, let's pull out the guns so that this way they'll be more likely to voluntarily consent. This way they will be happy and trusting of the people bringing the guns to conduct research. I don't know where this woman comes from, but the problem with this scenario here is here's how it works. Here's what happens next. So we already know that the Indians don't want them in their business when it comes to their meth addiction. So now we've got these trade partner agreements where what they'll do is they'll create what's called a task force. So this includes your local tribal police, it includes your judges and everybody else she talked about, and they will sign on to the agreement, and the researchers will give them questions to ask and what kind of information it is they want drawn from these meth addicts. So if a tribal policeman now pulls over a Indian who he believes has a meth addiction, now he's interested, isn't he? Because it goes on to tell you that the police officers earn credit when they participate in this type of program. So yeah, he's pretty interested in this guy now because this guy is going to get him some credit. And that credit is important to him. So regardless of the man's willingness to participate in this type of thing, here's how we're going to get that information. If you're not going to willingly tell me your little secrets, if you're not going to willingly tell me that you have a problem or that you don't want me to follow through your treatment centers, you're going to do it through the court. So now the police officer will likely arrest this Indian who otherwise shouldn't have been arrested. And now the court system will tell him he's committed a crime. And because he committed a crime, you're going to go to jail. And there's only one way out, buddy. We're not going to put you in jail if you just cooperate, if you participate in this correctional service. So they will put him through drug service programs. They will put him through court service programs. He might have to do, like some sort of, cleaning up the streets or, SWAT or something like that. But the reason this is important to understand is because each one of the players, or what are called stakeholders in this game, all receive credit. And in addition to that, they receive clout because they are generating revenue for the community, because these CBPRs are not free. These people get paid, they pay the community to allow for this research to be conducted. So there's no reason why anyone should believe that every person the police pull over, or every person that goes through the court system, is somehow guilty of whatever it is they're saying. They have a lot of incentive here to make it appear as though there are more meth addicted Indians than there are not. So they only are able to participate in these programs if they can show through reports that a certain amount of meth addicts in this community actually exist. If they can't show that, they're not going to get to participate, and they're not going to get credits, and they're not going to get paid. So if they can't find enough meth addicts after taking a loan to begin this program, they're in debt. Okay, so the state or the community will front the money in the beginning for this research to be conducted. They get reimbursed. So once they've said, yeah, sure, we're going to do this CBPR research program, they create these task force that costs money. They have to create services to help these people that they find with meth addiction. That costs money. They have to hire a bunch of people, sometimes, rent a space to put the people in. So they front all that money and then cannot find anyone who has a meth addiction, or can only find very few. They're in trouble. They just spent all that money and they're going to lose it because they will not get reimbursed if they didn't come up with enough subjects to study. So it would behoove them to make sure that they meet that quota. And I think it's sad, that we have already stripped and raped our Indian people so badly. Let's do it some more through prison systems and torture. But again, this is not simply through tribes. This is just an example. This is the best one I could find to show you how the cops were involved with this entire idea, and why we cannot logically believe that they're being honest 100% of the time. So, believe your neighbor, believe the person who is telling you something's wrong, because it is likely they're telling you the truth. So community-based participatory research is basically the development of, or the beginning of, the human subject studies. Like I told you, they will go and get approval when they want to study something like this, and then they create contracts with all of your local judges and police officers to incentivize them to collect enough subjects to research. And they're even sitting here asking them to apply force. So we know that a researcher himself can't go into this tribe and do what he wants to do because it's illegal. So they get the community, or the police officers and the judges, to make it look legal. And this is scary I feel horribly sad because I would never do this to our Indian people who, like I said, they've already lost so much. This is just disgusting, but you know, whatever, it is what it is. So who decides this? So it's based on culture of the community. You as a community are typically pretty quiet, but we know you're a Christian community. We at least know that much. So because we know that, we also know that any type of nonprofit Christian organization who zeroes in on this problem, say in this case it's the meth addiction, we know that they have the Christians' principles and moral beliefs in your community that they would be able to develop drug programs that would fit the needs of the culture of the community. Hold on, when did I ever get to tell you what my culture was, right? Like, when did I get to participate in some sort of consensus that says that I have the same beliefs as these people? And it doesn't matter. So if your local church organizers find out that this little research project is going on, the next step is they will create some sort of nonprofit organization that is missioned to seek out people who have been convicted of meth charges and offer them helpful services instead. And this is what most people commonly know as AA in our communities. Christian-based services to counsel you and give you the treatment that you need to help with alcoholism because you didn't commit a crime, you have a mental defect, and we're going to make you fix it. There are many of them, and they're called public citizenry. So the community leaders in these areas, right, what they will do is speak on your behalf, the whole community. So in order for them to do this, in order for them to participate, they have to be members of your community. They have to live there. So all of these local nonprofits or public citizenry creations, they will deal with specific topics and basically proclaim to be you. They're saying that there's a meth problem in this community and our community is Christian based. So therefore we can say that, yeah, we need to intervene into all meth addicts' lives in this kind of way. And it sounds good because it says it's nonprofit, but it ain't. So it looks good because it says nonprofit. But in the end, the nonprofit is really just kind of a filtration for the bigger reward. So now you have what I would say is more like a shell company perpetrating as, some kind of Christian do-gooder. And what happens next is they'll create a center where all of these services for research can be conducted at the same time that they're giving the treatments. So really, they're not trying to help the Indians. They're only trying to steal the information of the meth addict so that they can now serve the community and give their professional friends jobs. And after they've collected that research, they can write a journal telling you what they found in their studies, what treatments they applied, and what was effective. Typically, it comes down to some sort of awesome sales for your drug dealers or the medication providers. But this helps everybody in the community now, doesn't it? So that's where the economy comes in. So everybody is doing great as far as the professionals are concerned. They're all employed. They're all getting a lot of foot traffic because their clients are an automatic guarantee through the police, through the cops, through the judges. So this is a nonprofit organization that is pulling in more business than any other social service business anywhere in the world, right? So yeah, it's a little sneaky, but it is what it is. This is how it works, and that's what I'm here to share with you. So I'm going to put you on pause a second to find another topic. I'll be right back here. Let's see. Okay, so what all this is really designed to do is to create early intervention because they think that all of this information they've collected about you or your child up to date somehow puts the public at risk because you're socially stupid. So, because they think that about you, they feel that there are ways that they can intervene before maybe you snap, before you do something that harms another person. So it's all based on prediction. So they predict if you came from a family that had some sort of violent tendencies, you know, there was abuse, domestic violence, something in your family, you came from that family, you're already at a certain level of risk. But now, when you demonstrate as a child that you have the wiggles, that increases the amount of risk you impose to the public. Now, if you're a teenager and you partied and got caught partying, you increased your risk to harm the public. Later on, you get a DUI, you've increased that risk. So this is what they're trying to do, is to keep all this data about you to determine not only if you're a risk, but what kind of drugs can they give you? What kind of drugs can they sell for their buddies at the medical institutions? What kind of professionals can they get some traffic running in through their office for? So that's what the early intervention stuff is for. And all of this comes down to the employer of the judges, of the police officers, and that employer is the university, the flagship university of your community. So inside of this university, there's a data collection center for this purpose. There are several workers in here that collect and do what's called a forensic analysis of the community's problems. And then what they do is they develop a team of people, team of professionals to analyze the situation and determine what kind of interventional programs the community can use as a resource to help them with their social retardation. So all of these different interventions are created by these professionals in order to help the community, they say. But it's more to help the professionals, because if they had any concern for the community at all, these programs wouldn't be incentivized to the extent that there's quotas. These incentivizations and these quotas actually make the people that are engaged in this hungry and greedy. So we don't know for sure that their data that they've collected is accurate for that reason all by itself. There may, you know, if we're talking about child abuse, there may have only been maybe 4 or 5 people in the whole community that ever actually abused their child. But because we can't get good research off of that, we need to make it up. We need to find more than 5. I mean, you heard the lady in that video, you know, the researchers can't gather enough people that are having a meth problem. Well, maybe there's not as many as you think. Maybe there was only that small handful. We don't know now. Now we can't really use that science and say it's accurate because we've incentivized people to make it up in order to meet these quotas. But it all begins with that. So now what we have are, how do we get paid, right? How does all these people end up getting their credits and getting paid? Some of it goes through the municipal pension funds. So when we talk about achieving credits and accolades, if you're a police officer or some sort of public employee, you want to make sure that you have the best possible pension plan. And that pension plan, the municipal pension plan in particular, is paid for through the investors for all of these different community services. So this is a perk to the deal, to the trade partner agreements, in basically stealing the intellectual property or the information of all of the people in the community. So if you've done a good job and have found and targeted many people who needed services, your pension will increase in value. You won't be on a level 1, you'll be on a level 4. So it's a lot of incentive going on behind the scenes. And the way they do this is through the Medicaid system. So the Medicaid system is designed to cover the needs, medical needs of all the people in the community, but it has some restrictions and stipulation. So the state creates their own medical insurance, which is kind of like an overlay or a supplemental insurance. Every state has it. And this one in particular in my state is called All Kids. So All Kids insurance means that every kid somehow is linked into this. You may not be using it today. You might have your own private insurance, but if you end up in a courtroom and they determine that you and your husband are very combative and cannot agree on something, All Kids insurance will kick in for your child because you don't know that they are medically assessing your child's needs and they don't need to tell you. So as they conduct these medical assessments of your children and realize that because you two can't get along, the child has a need, the child is now labeled as being dependent. Dependent is a social defect and it is medically billed through the All Kids. Now, as you continue your fights, there will be several services provided to you, such as mediation and things like that. But ultimately, what they're after is that All Kids insurance overlay to draw more billing funds from the insurance. And in order for them to do that, the parents have to consent. And it also puts the child in a position where now they get to research how is a child affected when their parents are combative and separated. So more incentive. So now you have this All Kids insurance kicks in and you didn't permit it, did you? Because you didn't even know it existed. That's what a guardian ad litem's for. So now you have a guardian ad litem and they are pretty much put into every case. And the court makes it appear as though this guardian ad litem is supposed to be an attorney for the child and it's just to protect his interest. No, it's not. It is to make sure that the court can assume local parentis jurisdiction over the child so that they don't need to tell you they're tapping this insurance, so that they don't need to tell you what they intend on doing as far as research is concerned. So this guardian ad litem now has the control over all of the legal information that is about your kids. So if the guardian ad litem determines that the child is in need because the parents are combative, so she can now say, okay, well, let's get family services for this child. Let's get some social work for this child, and it will bill, and she will actually get paid on the back end through the All Kids program. So now she's able to make determinations about your child behind the scenes. She can determine which programs the child qualifies for, and now she can decide that or give permission to conduct human subject research over the child. And all this goes on and you never knew. Nobody asked your permission. Nobody told you that was going to happen, but that's what it's designed to do. So now you have all these different issues going on behind the scenes that you don't even understand. And no one's going to ever mention this to you. And they're being paid to do it. They're being incentivized to do it. And at the same time, the court is now giving you referral services, making the court a brokerage firm. It is definitely, without a doubt, providing referrals for an insurance network of providers in the All Kids network. That means they're brokeraging those services to you and your family. Kind of hard to have an impartial hearing, fair, meaningful hearing, out the window, because there's no reason for them to make a determination based in law or fact, because it's not lucrative. If they operated solely on law and fact, there'd be no money rolling through. They have to provide these services in order to cover the expenses of the court's services itself. And this is how they do it. But it is what it is. I mean, what can you say? So all of the reporting, if you have a CPS case, all of those people that you get involved with are considered to be therapeutic intervention services. And the beneficiary of those services most of the time is the children. They are a beneficiary, but it's not the beneficiary of trust money. It is they are the beneficiary of medical insurance designed to intervene and prevent future harm to the child, but also to prevent unnecessary future claims on Social Security. That's what these little overlays are designed to do. So think of it this way: if you have been abused and it has somehow made you inhabilitated because you can't work properly, you have, I don't know, PTSD. The next thing you would be able to do as an adult is go to Social Security Administration, proclaim you have some sort of debilitative social defect, psychological defect, and it is preventing you from being able to keep a job. They would then have to pay you disability. Well, all of this is designed so that we can avoid that future claim on Medicaid, or I'm sorry, on Social Security, but it's also designed to say, hey, we gave you every opportunity to correct your problem. And because you refused those services or failed in doing those services or took those services, you've been trained. So we're not going to pay out. We're not going to give you the disability because we've given you everything we could to make sure that you were able to have a better outcome, right? So that's how, in a nutshell, it works. And I know this video is going very, very long, so I am going to stop it here to leave you kind of with those thoughts. And I want you to understand how very serious this is, because, you know, I have worked, like I said, with many families that have had intervention with guardian ad litems and with child protective services. And once they've pinned the target on you, it's like impossible to get out, and nobody cares about what's happening to these kids. So these children will get placed with abusive families or put into a juvenile facility that is abusive in many ways. But we're all like, oh my God, you know, best interest of the child. Why are we doing this? Let's stop this from happening. But for them, it doesn't matter. This is collateral damage, see? Because if the child is abused, to them it serves a greater good for the community, because we can now analyze and watch this child being abused and watch how he grows up and how he behaves to protect the future public. If we didn't abuse him, we would not know how to prevent it in the future. So that's how it works. You know, if your child, if you have a child protective circumstance going on right now, and you are up in arms wondering, why are they giving this child to an abuser? Why are they giving this child to a facility that has been shown to abuse children over and over again? It's because it's lucrative to harm the child. If you harm him, you got yourself a human subject to research in the future. If you don't let that happen, there won't be any research and we won't know, will we? So this is very, very important to understand for that reason. And like I said, this is going to be a series of videos to break it all down for you. This is part 2. And I'll get more in depth as far as all the players in the game and how the insurance network works in the future. So if this is all interesting to you, like I said, you can go and find all this information for yourself through the employer of these people. So this is, you know, like I said, if you look at your birth certificate, you'll find what unit of education. But I think that in all circumstances, it will lead you to the flagship university. And kind of just dig through, especially when it comes to early intervention. And I'll do another video, like I said, we'll get in detail further along as I go along here.